Good Friday morning, friends. Welcome to another episode of Finding God in the Dark. This week, well, I think by now everybody knows who we are, and our names are like right there. So,
Yeah,
this week we're talking about a a film called A Real Pain. It is written and directed and starring Jesse Eisenberg and also stars Kieran Culkin, who just won a SAG-AFTRA award for Best Supporting Actor in a film for his role in this. The basic premise of the film is two cousins who take sort of a pilgrimage to Poland to honor their recently deceased grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor.
yeah, she paid for the trip. Yeah, which I
Yeah,
thought was interesting.
yeah. So, yeah, I'll get my baggage out of the way right away because I talked with Jonathan a little bit about this ahead of time. This film was very emotional for me, just because the relationship between the two main characters, Benji and David, felt a lot like a relationship with my brother.
Mm.
And so there was, for me at least, this film really hit home. I think for a lot of people, you may see some similarities in your own relationships, but let's talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I think good. This is a quiet film. I call it a quiet film.
Hmm.
Um, it's kind of a film that kind of invites you into the inner workings of a relationship and lets you just kind of experience it. And then my guess is it wants you to explore your own relationships and reflect on them. That's usually how these movies go.
I think that's
Um,
fair. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was really powerfully done. I mean, uh, you legitimately see the love of these two cousins have for each other, but the reality that they're very different people, and that I think on some level they want to be each other in a lot of ways. I think the Benji character wants the stability of the David character and wants kind of the kind of respect the David character gets, but at the same time, the David character, who's an introvert, who has kind of his life figured out, wants to be adventurous. Once he says at one point, "I would love to walk into the room, a room like you, and everybody focus on me," and that's never going to happen. But
Yeah.
but then he goes, I won't use the bad word, but he goes, "But you walk in this room, you get all this attention, and then you crap over everything." You know,
Yeah.
you just you don't use it for moving the situation forward or for gaining, you know, gaining status or gaining whatever. You use it, you just kind of let it fall apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is a powerful relationship movie,
Mhm.
right? It's a short run. What's it, only about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, something
Yeah,
like
it's an
that.
hour and a half. Yeah, it's an hour and a
Yeah.
half.
So it's not like it drags out a lot. It really does get to kind of the meat and the potatoes of the relationship between these two. In the film, they're cousins.
Yeah.
But I think the relationship applies regardless of
Oh yeah.
who you're talking about. And it is really, there's this wonderful dynamic between, one's an extrovert, one's an introvert. One is like a family guy, the other is completely independent solo,
Yeah.
sort of a free bird.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's this, it's like it's an odd couple movie, right?
Yeah.
It's almost an odd couple movie where they are so very different, and yet you can see how much they care about each other, how much they care for each other, and yet I think you had sent me one of the lines that I thought was worth talking about,
Yeah.
and now it's going to take me a second to pull that up. Um,
Let's see. I love him, I hate him, and I want to be him. Is that the one?
that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. I love and I hate him and I want to be him. And
Yeah.
I think that applied to both of these cousins,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like there's and maybe we can apply this, as genuine people, apply this to almost any relationship. I mean, there's
Yeah.
things about my friends that I love, and
Yeah.
there's things about my friends that I hate. And, there's sometimes I want to be like them, and sometimes I don't
Yeah,
want to be anything at all like them. You know,
yeah,
Yeah, it's a it's a wild film for what it is, right?
yeah. I mean, I really think it really is an interesting way to explore, in a weird way, loneliness and what it means to be lonely.
Okay,
Um, just because you can see from one vantage point, you can say like David's very lonely. You know, like he go throughout this trip, he's always walking by himself because other people are having conversations, or he's sitting over here for lunch when everybody's over here because he doesn't want to kind of fight his way into the group. You know, and
right.
yet he has this loving family that at the end of the movie embraces him, and you can just see like he has this completeness in his life that is nowhere near loneliness, right?
Yeah,
And then you have the Benji character who is the life of the party, who even when people get upset with him and mad at him, over time he wins them over and they kind of see his point. People are drawn to him. People always want to have conversations. People invite him
hmm
out in the middle of the night to go for drinks. You know, like he's always engaged with people. He I know people like this. Like he'll be in line at the TSA for 15 minutes because he's having a conversation with the bag person, and you're just like, why the heck are you having this conversation right now?
we got a plane to catch, right?
And and yet, so if you zoom out far enough, right, you would say during this trip, during most of this movie, David's lonely and Benji's not. And yet, the movie begins and ends with Benji sitting in an airport, desperate to have connection, right?
Right.
Desperate to get someone to talk to. And yet, David, this guy who's been kind of disconnected through this whole journey, the movie ends with him, and he's surrounded by two people he dearly loves and has the deepest kind of connection in the movie. You know,
Yeah,
and just kind of, to me, it makes you explore the idea of what does it mean to be lonely and what does it mean to have true connection.
yeah. There's a beautiful imagery in that when you see Benji at the end,
Yeah,
he decides rather than take a ride with David and catch a
yeah,
train back home, he stays at the airport and he's
yeah,
just sitting at the airport surrounded by thousands of people and yet
yeah.
almost completely isolated.
And it that scene felt really sad to me, and
Oh
maybe
yeah, absolutely.
um and it just, to me, I don't know, there's a part of me that I'm an introvert, and so I totally understand David. Like if I'm out with a group of people and I don't know them really well, I'm gonna
Yeah,
sit at a different table and
yeah,
someone's gonna have to invite me into the group. That's just kind of how I roll. You know,
yep.
I'm gonna head back
This
after,
is why we're friends, Jonathan.
yeah, I'm gonna head back after the dinner and just go to bed because you know the dinner has been fun, but it has exhausted me, right? You know, and I just need to, and so I recognize my bias in kind of understanding David in a way that I don't understand Benji. But
hmm
at the same time, there's no question in my life I'd rather go home to the wife and kid who love me,
Yeah,
and clearly miss me, than sit at the airport and wait for a conversation. I just, no, thank you.
yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. It's powerfully written and I think powerfully acted that way as well.
Yeah,
Just to see you can almost see this really deep sadness in Benji's face at the end.
yeah, yes,
Even though he has been the most happy-go-lucky, outgoing,
yeah.
throughout the film when he was with this tour group. But at the end, there's just this real sense of almost depressive sadness,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it leads into another quote that I liked about Benji saying, "People can't walk around being happy all the time." You know, like he has moments in the film where he just loses it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the I don't know if they're trying to portray him as being bipolar or having some mental health issue. I don't know, but there are moments where he seems to just kind of rupture the relationship with the group. Most of the movie they're on a tour of Holocaust sites in Poland.
Right.
And and there are just times where everything's going great and everybody loves him, and then he'll just cause a problem that doesn't need to be a problem. Like he'll just cause a rift. And one of these times where he has created a rift in the group and kind of gone off on his own, and David kind of chases him down. He says to David that line where he goes, "People can't be happy all the time." Like, and there's almost like
Yeah.
he must feel like a pressure that he's always got to be on, and he's always got to be happy, and he's always, you know, again, I really think it's interesting. This movie really made me think about who are we honest with? How does honesty function? And how do we create spaces where we can truly be honest with each other? And I would argue the church is supposed to be that, in my mind. The church is supposed to
Absolutely.
be a place where I think about what is it that I can't think of the name of the group, but the Stained Glass People song. Do you remember the song I'm talking about? Where it talks about you kind of you go to church and you put on an act, and what would it be like if we actually dropped that act and we were broken and we were hurt and showed that to each other instead of shiny stained glass people, I think is the line of the song.
Sounds like an REM song, but that's probably not it.
No, no, it's a Christian group.
Oh, okay.
Casting Crowns, Casting Crowns.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
But to me, what makes me really sad, and you probably have seen it, I've seen it a lot in my life, where somebody needs something, someone, a member of my church needs something, or they need to share something, and they won't share it with anybody, or they won't ask for help. And they're like, well, you know, I don't want to be that for this church. And you're like, that's what the church is. Like,
Yeah,
like that's what the church is supposed to be.
yeah,
And it just, I don't know, it made me sad that a lot of people don't have those spaces where they can just be honest. They can just go, I'm hurting. Or they can just
yeah,
say, you know what, I don't want to be happy right now.
yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to share a little story that kind of relates to that. In one of the two churches that I serve currently, we have a young-ish family who have, between the two of them, they have three children currently. A teenage son who's getting ready to go off to the Air Force. They have a daughter who is 11, I think. She's in a wheelchair, CP. And they have a little baby toddler who they had a very difficult pregnancy with her. Um, and mom is pregnant again. And several weeks ago, they had an ultrasound that gave them some potentially really bad news about the baby, that he could have an underdeveloped heart and that he might face several surgeries before he's a year and a half old and may still need a heart transplant. And it was a, obviously very emotional time for that family, but also for the church because, they're very connected in with the church and people were really feeling this. Well, one Sunday during our prayers, a couple of weeks ago, we all just came in and laid hands on her and prayed over her. And, the witness here is that prayer works because she had a fetal echocardiogram. The baby's
Mm,
heart is perfectly normal.
awesome.
And so, like she posted something on Facebook about it, and I sat there just in tears, like,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, God, that this is what the church is, that we ought to be able to come in and surround people when they're feeling the most hurt, the most pain. This is what we're supposed to be. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Y-
Yeah.
and and the sad part is I don't think we do it well often enough.
Yeah.
I think for whatever reason we get wrapped up in our own things. But I don't know what it is. I don't know the exact reasons, but um,
I think it's hard.
yeah, it is hard. There's no question. It is, and we see this, right? You and I, as clergy, we see this. It's hard to step into other people's trauma and other people's pain.
Yeah.
Um, I talk about how this film affected me,
Yeah.
okay? And it's primarily on a personal level. You
Sure.
know, I don't, I'm not gonna air my baggage here. It's not the place for it.
Yeah.
But it is that it's that same kind of thing. Like, I had to talk to people and I had to, talk to a therapist and, process my own issues there, right?
Yeah,
Um, but we as a church we don't do it well. At least not often enough.
no.
Sometimes we do, but
I think we really are. I think at least in American Christianity, we've sold this bill of goods that if you're truly connected with Christ, you're going to be happy. If you're truly connected with Christ, you're going to have this amazing outlook on life, and if you don't, something's wrong.
yeah,
Instead of recognizing that just a cursory review of like the just the Bible, let alone great spiritual writers and teachers, there's always things like the dark night of the soul. There's always times that everybody goes through where they don't feel God's presence or they're struggling in ways that they don't understand. And the blessing of the church community should be that you don't have to go through that alone.
right,
That
right,
someone else can kind of come alongside you and help you carry that weight.
right.
You know,
And I think that feeds into in this discussion. I think it feeds into another angle that was in this film that was also in a film we looked at a couple of weeks ago, Sugarcane, and that is this whole idea of generational trauma, right? Of course, we're talking now about the Holocaust and not this. It was the Indian residential schools
yeah,
before, but. Um, there is this again this sense of how this trauma is passed down through generations in that you know these two cousins had very different experiences of their grandmother, this
yeah,
Holocaust survivor.
yeah.
And I think it's telling if you remember the one discussion when David was saying that grandmom said that, first generation Jews are hardworking, get out there and earn the money, and second generation Jews, what was it? They
Become doctors or lawyers.
become doctors and lawyers, and then third generation Jews live in their parents' basement and smoke pot.
Yeah,
Uh, which was exactly a reference to Benji, and Benji was like,
yeah,
"She said that." you
yeah.
you
I
could
mean, yeah,
see you could see how that trauma almost was handed down over generations.
yeah. I think I also found it interesting. And granted, we're not Jewish. I have my sister actually is an Orthodox Jew, but we're not Jewish. But I
Right.
thought it was interesting too. It's kind of a parallel kind of story in some ways of this idea of are you going to embrace the Jewish story or are you going to hide it? Are you going to, because they had a character in the movie that was a Rwandan refugee
Hmm.
who became Jewish because he was inspired. It was almost like you understand in this Jewish story. I see what I struggled with in my country, and I found peace in that story, and I want to embrace it.
Right.
And then the guide at one point says throughout this Polish city that was next to only about a mile from the concentration camp that they go and visit in the movie, he talks about the Jewish stories here, but it's hidden throughout the city. And he talked about all the ways that, like, if you pay attention, it's there, right?
Yeah.
And it just made me think, like, how do you embrace your religious story? How do you embrace the story of your people, your ethnic group? How are you going to let it be and unfold in your life, or how are you going to hide it? And I think that's a story for all of us. There's a group that really shapes us, and for Christians, I would argue it should be the church. But how are you going to let that story shape you, or are you going to hide from it? If you're a person of color, how are you going to let that story shape you, or how are you going to hide from it? If you're a person with a disability, how are you going to let that story shape you, or how are you going to hide from it? And I thought it was interesting because you see in the characters people embracing their Judaism and finding like help and healing in it, and you see other people Um, a good example, I think, is when David and this Rwandan refugee, I can't think of his name right now,
Yeah, I don't remember, but
but he says to him, he goes, David says, "Are you very religious?" He goes, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "You keep all this?" He goes, "No, but I always keep Sabbath." And then he goes, "How about you, David?" And this is a guy that was always Jewish, always part of this tradition. And he's like, "No, no, I always found it too rote or too, like." And the guy just looks at him and says, "I think it could help you." Like it's almost like he's almost like, "Dude, connect to the tradition because it will give you some of the peace you're looking for."
right.
And, and that's what I would say to people that are part of the Christian faith is there are just these amazing gifts of spiritual practices and ways to look at the world. And I would encourage people to embrace them and not ignore them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's I think what you're really one of the things we're really getting at here is that this film is about identity, right? Core
Yeah.
identity.
Mhm.
And okay, for this film, it is about Jewish,
Yeah.
religious Jew or practicing Jew or whatever. For us, I mean, we can take those same ideas and say, what is our core identity as a Christian?
Yeah.
Where does that apply in our lives? How do we live that out? And it's not we don't just live it out by going and visiting historic sites. Look, I've been to Israel twice. They're great trips. They're
Yeah.
wonderful. I had a great experience there. But
Yeah.
that's not, you know, being able to say I walked where Jesus walked doesn't mean that I'm a better Christian than somebody else or that, I'm a super Christian. No, it just means I had an experience. I think what is the telling part is how do you live this? How does it show up in your day-to-day existence?
Yeah.
And
How does it
and
mark you out?
that's the challenge for all Christians, right? That's the challenge for every one of us is how is our identity as a follower of Christ lived every day?
Yeah, I
Not
remember.
not just once a week, as this is from my lay leader at Asbury, not just for the times on Sunday when we're weighing down the pew cushions. You
Yeah.
know?
Well, no, I remember I remember a speaker that came to a clergy retreat like probably a decade ago or more, and she did a teaching on prayer, different types of prayer.
Hmm.
And at one point, she said to us in the audience, she goes, "If someone walked into your house, would they know you were a Christian?" You know, if they
Hmm.
just walked around your house, if you weren't there, but if they just walked around your house, would they know you were a Christian? And that's a powerful thing to think about is people should be able to say there's something different about you
Right.
and you should stick out. That's the idea of the church. We're supposed to model this different way of being human, this different way of being community, this different way of suffering and serving others. And you should stick out. And if you don't, there's an issue.
Yeah.
And
Paul
yet,
Paul said something about being in the world, but not
of the
of the. Yeah, there it is.
yeah. And I think we live in a time where that's part of this movie is are you going to stand out or are you going to fit in? And how are you going to do that?
And
And
and not just that, but what does fitting in look like?
yeah,
Because both David and Benji fit in a certain
yeah,
way
yeah,
in this, but in obviously different ways,
yeah,
very different ways.
yeah. I don't know when that it was a very small discussion about Sabbath, but I really made me think about really reminding myself to do spiritual practices and
Hmm.
really trying to help my church more and more engage with the spiritual practices of our faith.
Yeah.
Prepare for Holy Communion. Don't eat an hour before you take Holy Communion. Pray before you take it and ask God to use this to transform you. Like, those kind of things. Praying every day. Um, you know, fasting on occasion. Like those things are there. And what I tell people all the time is those things are everywhere and not on just our tradition, almost every tradition. And there's a part of me that's like, if you can find fasting in every kind of religious tradition you can think of, if you can find prayer in every religious tradition you can think of, perhaps it's actually works.
Or it's kind of important at least, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's also an important part there that it's not just rote. Like David says, right? It's not just, well, we do it, we say the same things over again, we do the same things over again because that's what we know. And if, yeah, okay, but have you in the last 10 years even considered what it means?
Well, yeah, it's the Methodist understanding of of the interaction between things and faith, right?
Yeah,
So like our understanding of Holy Communion is that it is the body and blood of Christ, but it's only the body and blood of Christ when it's met with our faith, which
right.
means we believe it. And if we believe it, it becomes that special sharing of Jesus's offering for us and Jesus's willingness to be with us. But if we're just like, oh God, it's another 10 minutes, like why are we doing this? Then it's
Kick
not.
off, kick off.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've told people, I've literally had people do this in the back at different churches when I'm
I've
doing
seen
communion.
it.
And I'm
Not
just
not
like,
to me, but I have seen it.
I'm just like, are you kidding me? This is the God of the universe coming near to you, and you're like, can you do it in 5 minutes and not 10? And
All right,
like,
that's enough God for now, right?
yeah, I don't need this. Yeah, I
All right, we
just
put a time limit on God. That's enough God. Let's move on.
yeah, I don't know. To me, I love movies. That's why we do this. But
Exactly. Yeah.
I forget sometimes how much I love these quiet movies where they just make you think about something. They just make you think about a relationship. They just ask you questions. To me, that's some of the power of cinema is that you can sit there and go like your brother. How is my relationship with my brother? How could I have made it better? What can I learn going forward in other relationships I have?
Right.
Or um, how do I connect with people or how do I not connect? Those kind of things are things that we often don't think about, and yet a movie can make you think about it if you really allow it to.
Yeah. That's probably a worthwhile episode of these ongoing discussions is just why we like movies so much, right?
Yeah,
I think for at least for my part, one of the big things is that um film is, it's the modern cave painting, right? It's the modern storytelling around the fire. It is how we communicate our bigger stories,
yeah,
which is why I can come, having that mindset, I can come to sometimes the worst of horror films or garbage films and find a message
yeah,
because ultimately there's something to learn or something to avoid or something, I mean, there's always it's pretty rare you find a film nowadays that doesn't have some kind of a moral, and I think that's part of the what modern storytelling is, right? It is just a Grimm's fairy tales, Aesop's fables
yeah.
in visual format, which were the stories we grew up on, the stories that built our morals as kids.
Yeah, I mean, I to me, a mark of a good movie is it you think about it afterwards. Like it
Yeah.
kind of sticks with you. And this movie, I recommended this movie to you because I just watched it on my own, and I was just like, I'd like to talk to somebody about it. And so this is now, unfortunately for you, this is my outlet of I saw this really interesting movie, and I don't have anybody in my house right now except my dog, and so I need you to watch it and talk to me about
And I'm cool with that actually, because you know what? To be honest, I mean, if it were just up to me, okay, like I sit at home on a, I've got nothing else going on a Tuesday night or something,
it.
and I put on a movie, I'm going to gravitate towards the stuff that I'll watch a horror movie, I'll watch an action movie, something that I can kind of tune my brain off.
Yeah, yeah,
So this is this is actually better because it's forcing me to think.
Yeah,
you know, and we should we should
sure.
all, be challenged at some point, you know, on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I think that's important. Look, we're getting close to time, so we got to talk about next week. Now, this is the last of our series of films that are
Uh,
nominated for Academy Awards this year. Um, do note that we are not using this as a preaching illustration for this Sunday, but that we're referring back to um, A Complete Unknown, which is the Bob Dylan film that we
I
watched
did
in December.
because this will drop on
Hmm.
Friday morning. I wanted people to know we're going to actually show a complete unknown at Lacey United Methodist Church on Friday night at 6:30. So if
Nice.
you're in the area and would like to see it, and not right now, you'd have to pay $30 to see it because you have to download it.
Hmm.
So if you don't want to do that and you're in the area, please come join us. So
Yeah, indeed, do that because it's a great film. It's my pick for best film of the year, of the ones at
yeah,
least that I've seen.
I know I've seen.
You know, I'll give it that. I haven't seen all of them. I have seen that one and Conclave and what was the other one we reviewed? Anyway,
Can't
I've
remember.
seen a
Yeah,
few of them.
yeah,
I would still go with the Bob Dylan film. I thought it was great. And that is the film that we're going to talk about in sermons on Sunday. So go back and check out that podcast on this channel if you want to be up to date on that.
yeah.
As for next week, thoughts?
Well, I thought we were going to go into Lent, right?
We're going in.
Okay.
So the following Sunday is March 9th.
Yeah.
I'm for starting on March 9th. I'm starting a series. Jonathan's not necessarily going to follow this series, but I'm starting a series called The Journey of Jesus According to Hollywood.
Mhm.
So the film that I'm going to be talking about for that week is The Last Temptation of Christ.
Woo! I like it.
It's a Scorsese film, as I recall. Yes,
Yes, it is.
and Jonathan likes Martin Scorsese, so we're right in his
Well, I
wheelhouse on that one.
this movie is not a typical Jesus movie, and
No.
we got problems with it. We'll both have problems with it,
Oh,
but
I'm sure. I
it
haven't. I
also.
haven't seen it. I've heard, but I have not
Oh,
seen
you've
it.
never seen it?
No, no.
Oh, but it also has some interesting things about the idea of God becoming man that we often don't think about as
Mhm.
Christians, and I think that's worth thinking about.
Okay,
So,
good. So then the film for next week will be The Last Temptation of Christ,
yeah,
and we're going to move into Lent. And Lent is we're going to focus specifically on films that either feature or are about Jesus. So
yeah,
that's going to be a fun little ride.
it is.
Uh,
You start out with a controversial one. Talk
Starting
about
out with
what
a
you
banger, right?
think.
So, all right, friends. Until next week. Thanks for watching. Keep on finding God in the dark. We will see you all next week.
Bye.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.